to Green Hope's webinar series on another very important topic of discussion. Good morning from Toronto, Canada, and a very good afternoon and good evening to all of you joining us on Zoom and Facebook Live. And a huge welcome to our amazing panelists who don't need any introduction. And their insights will shed light on the way forward as we rebuild better. Today's webinar's theme is UN75, Building on the Legacy. My name is Gekasha. I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I will be your moderator for this session. So 75 years ago, global leaders came together to build a new world order from the ruins and devastation of World War II that heaped misery, pain, and death upon millions. And we're now at a similar crossroads in time when a virus invisible to the naked eye has shaken the foundations of the world in much a similar way, leaving us in a state of uncertainty that none of us have encountered in our lifetimes, and the end is still nowhere in sight. So as we gather to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the founding of the world's apex body, it is fitting that we draw inspiration from the principles that brought all nations and all peoples together so that we use it as the foundation for charting the course of the future. So let us join together in our collaborative wisdom as we, the peoples of the United Nations, as the preamble stated, and determine how we can save current and succeeding generations from the scourge of this pandemic, which has brought untold sorrow to humankind. We are privileged to have with us a distinguished panel of multidisciplinary experts and speakers, all of whom have decades of rich experience with UN systems and processes, and we shall draw upon their wisdom and knowledge to seek solutions and guidelines on how we can come out stronger and more resilient from this crisis. So, without any further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker today, Her Excellency Maria Fernandez Espinosa, President of the 73rd United Nations General Assembly and former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defense, Ecuador. Ms. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kekashan, for bringing us together once again. Thank you to the Green Hope Foundation, and I'm very proud to share spaces with you at the World Future Council. You, of course, being the Youth Ambassador of the World Future Council. It is a pleasure, really, to share this digital platform with all of you to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. And of course, greetings to all my fellow panelists today. You sent us in advance a couple of questions, and I'll be more than happy, to respond to the question and the questions. And the first, of course, is what are the critical issues that the UN needs to focus attention in the process of building back better? And you said it so clearly, Kekashan. The COVID pandemic has proved to be perhaps the most profound, multidimensional world crisis since the end of the Second World War. It has touched every country, every economy, every health system. It has resulted in an unprecedented health crisis, while, of course, exacerbating, magnifying already existing economic, social, political, environmental challenges. So, but in addition to causing immense human suffering, the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted key vulnerabilities in our societies and economic and political systems. So a recovery plan for a post-COVID-19 world should be, I would use one sentence, should be to build inclusive, sustainable, and resilient societies. This is not, an easy fix for that. So I think that the message from the pandemic, if we learned something, is that returning to business as usual that prioritizes short-term economic gains cannot and should not be the way forward. We need a new common sense. We need to build a new normality, because poverty, inequalities, violence, the extinction, and the climate crisis are not normal. And we have, with us our survival toolkit, which is the 2030 agenda. And the Sustainable Development Goals are more needed perhaps today than before when they were adopted in 2015. They should be used as the roadmap for building back better. We know too well that the current crises are intertwined and that we need a systemic, holistic approach to combat poverty, inequalities, climate, hunger, conflict, etc. So, however, if I had to highlight, because you said prioritize, but if I had to highlight two of the most dangerous and pervasive threats that require our urgent attention, perhaps I would pick two. The first is, of course, the climate crisis, and the second is the women's rights and empowerment deficit. And I say that because any decision, any policy choice, any alternative has to factor in 50% of the world's population. So there is no possibility of building more sustainable and resilient societies without women and girls on board. So, the other issue is that if environmental degradation continues at current rates, climate change will cause far greater social and economic damage than those caused by COVID-19 itself. So we know that at the heart of building back better should be a transition towards low carbon economies and slowing biodiversity loss with the right policies, with the right decisions and investments. COVID-19 recovery packages, and every day we see yet another plan, another recovery strategy, but they should all be based on long-term climate objectives and seriously address biodiversity loss. And here I want to advocate for nature-based solutions. For example, nature-based solutions, recovery of our ecosystems can provide approximately 1/3 of the alternatives to achieve the climate mitigation targets of the Paris Agreement. So such solutions also provide co-benefits. They promote synergies with other areas of global concern, such as desertification, land degradation, drought. And we're going to listen very soon from Ibrahim Thiaw, a great friend. It also contributes to combat ocean acidification and biodiversity loss, while also creating jobs and bolstering local livelihoods. So the shorthand is that we cannot think about COVID-19 recovery or sustainable development, for that matter, or fighting poverty and inequalities if we do not address climate change. We have the knowledge, we have the technology, we have the resources. We are just missing the political drive, the wisdom, the vision, the leadership. I think that COVID-19 recovery packages are opportunities to build back better. I think that there is an urgent need to create a new social contract. And this new social contract has to be between society, the economy, and the planet. And it has to encompass, the principle of integrity and unity of the Earth system, considering that it is a common heritage of humankind, and in a way, a scaffold for our collective well-being. And this, of course, there's no easy answer to that, but it requires a more inclusive, holistic, and systemic approach. And this brings me to the second issue. I don't know how I am doing on time, but just say, you're done. But I think the second critical issue I wanted to address is meaningful participation of women in decision-making processes. It has been proven time and again. When women participate in decision-making, it increases quality, effectiveness, productivity, brings new perspectives and sustainable transformations to the table prioritizes resources and strengthens collective efforts and actions. Gender equality, is having been, as Minister of Defense, it is clear that gender equality is a stronger predictor of a state's peacefulness than even its level of democracy or gross domestic product. Where women are more empowered, a state is less likely to experience civil conflict or go to war. And there are numbers and statistics to prove this. It is clear that women are critical agents in sustaining peace. And it is not a coincidence that countries ranked the most stable and peaceful have a higher number of women in leadership positions. Iceland, for example, since 2008, remains the most peaceful country and a champion of gender equality. So shorthand for that, we need more women in power. As president of the General Assembly, I led a process called Women in Power, especially addressed to young women leaders. Numbers are staggering. I don't want to repeat the numbers that we already know, but just let's think that 85 out of 193 countries have never had a woman as a head of state and government. If you look at cabinet compositions, 20% of ministers of government are women, and in some countries, women are not represented at all. So I think that, and we are told that the gender gap will close in 100 years. And now with COVID-19 pandemic and its effects, this will, of course, set back this goal even further if we do not take immediate action. And I'm very proud to be part of the steering committee of Beijing Plus 25, and we are really trying, to push hard for the new women's rights agenda for the next 25 years, which is again not an easy task. And I would just, I think that just to close this first question, and perhaps I would say a few things for the second question, just to keep my time, in discipline. I think that efforts to build back better needs to include our multilateral system, our international organizations, our multilateral system, with the United Nations as its epicenter should be fit for purpose. And therefore, it needs to be retooled in order to be more inclusive, more efficient, more accountable and relevant. And during the Q&A part, we can discuss. I was just finishing a meeting with the UN75 team, just addressing, what are the priorities for this retooling of our multilateral system and the UN. And the second question you asked us to reflect on, if the UN is adapting to the new normal and leaving no one behind. And I think that, and here I want to perhaps be shorter than the first question, but I think that in spite of its shortfalls, the UN is irreplaceable, especially in times of hardship, in times of crisis. I think it plays a critical role to ensure spaces for dialogue, for agreement, and even for dissent. No, we need, I think we all agree that we need concerted action to build back better our society. I think global dialogue, international cooperation, multilateral and solidarity-based responses are the only way forward. And there is no, a secret on acknowledging that. So be it COVID-19, climate change, inequalities, et cetera, the only way to address them is through concerted action. And the platform for concerted action, the world platform, of course, is the United Nations. So let's recall that in our interconnected world, and we have learned that the hard way with COVID, no one is safe until everybody is safe. So we need a multilateral system that delivers, that adapts to the new challenges. We need to connect communities of practice with communities of knowledge, science with decision making, and I think the UN is the right place, space, and platform to do that. And just to close, to say that if the UN wants to adapt and be fit for purpose, it needs to basically overcome what I see as three deficits, which is the participation and inclusion deficit in decision-making, predictable institutionalized mechanisms to ensure intergenerational multi-stakeholder engagement in multilateral decision-making. The second deficit is a trust deficit in the capacity and willingness of international institutions to deliver. And we can elaborate further on this. And the third deficit is the implementation deficit of the hundreds of norms, of policies, of agreements that we have to build a better world. The need for a new multilateralism balanced scorecard is highly needed. You know, multilateralism, international cooperation is an issue of self-interest for citizens, for governments, for societies. And I think here we have to be clear that there is no contradiction between national interest and global challenges, between multilateralism and the needs and dreams of our country goes first. So there is no contradiction. There is, you know, both answers I think have a place and have a space. So I think that just to close, I would say that perhaps today we are witnessing the beginning of a new era to build back better, a new multilateral system. We, the voice and the agency coming from all of us. We are the UN, and the organization has to deliver for we the peoples. You know, this very powerful first phrase of the United Nations founding charter. I think I went beyond my time, but thank you, Kekashian, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maria. Absolutely. The UN is irreplaceable, and of course it is driven by the people, as we the peoples. And yes, the SDGs do need to be used as a roadmap for rebuilding better. We do need a systemic and holistic approach as we approach the new normal. And of course, we need to urgently address the issues of gender inequality and of course, climate change so that we can truly achieve a sustainable future. So thank you once again. And your presentation actually leads very well into our next panelist, who is Mr. Abraham Theo, UN Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, who will be joining us via video message. So I shall put him on.
Dear friends, thank you for your kind invitation to this webinar. First, I would like to thank Kekashian for her leadership. I'm very enthusiastic about the leadership and dynamism of our youth today. Congratulations, my friend, for being one of the most outstanding UNCCD land heroes. We are here today to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. If anniversaries are just about celebrating the past, they would have been pointless. They should help us take a step back to better look ahead. Much has been accomplished over the past decades. Better science to understand the importance of well-functioning ecosystems for our survival moved us to the path of sustainable development. The three Rio Conventions, respectively the Convention on Biodiversity, Climate Change, and Desertification, the Sustainable Development Goals, the groundbreaking Paris Agreement, and the Land Degradation Neutrality are all important milestones that we are proud of. We have drawn tremendous strength and achieved a lot together over the last decades. There's a change, but we are not yet there. We are still losing the race. For example, losing millions of hectares of productive land every year. Droughts are more frequent, more severe. This is a fact, and we are seeing it happening in every corner of the world. For instance, the western part of the United States is certainly currently facing the biggest drought in years, which is exacerbating wildfires, drying water supplies, and stifling crops. Climate change, loss of biodiversity, and land degradation are three facets of the same crisis. No one is spared. There is nowhere to hide. Let us face it. Let us fix it. We can still fix it. Dear friends, the COVID-19 pandemic is a powerful reminder of how much we depend on nature for our health, our food systems, and our livelihoods. We are creatures of the earth, the soil, the land. While much progress was made over the last 75 years, the pandemic is placing our collective gains at risk and throwing us even more off track in our efforts to reverse climate change, achieve land degradation, and the Sustainable Development Goals. In that context, I would like to make 3 points. First, we need to continue advocating strongly for the importance of multilateral action towards the protection of the environment and the land in which we are living. We need more multilateralism to that end, not less. And the United Nations is the perfect forum to achieve our inspiring vision for the 21st century in pursuit of progress for all. Achieving a land degradation neutral world is a beacon to a better world. Second, together with our two sisters conventions, climate change and biodiversity, we need to continue promoting a new social contract for nature. Desertification, land degradation, and drought are linked to the loss of natural habitat and the spread of novel viruses from animals to humans, called zoonosis. The rate of future zoonotic diseases emergence or reemergence will be closely linked to the evolution of the relationship between humans and the environment, expansion of the agricultural frontier, mining activities, deforestation, etc. We have gone too far with the destruction of natural habitat. We have broken the equilibrium. The pendulum swings in all directions, unpredictable, perhaps soon unstoppable. A new social contract for nature will serve as a framework for new global and national governance models based on rights, rewards, and responsibilities. A social contract for nature explicitly recognizes the fact that the future of humanity, economic growth, and nature are completely dependent on one another. In addition, acting together to tackle land degradation represents tremendous untapped potential to leave no one behind. Citizens can be provided with jobs, food security, and resilience to future shocks and stresses. Citizens can enjoy a sense of purpose and dignity in an uncertain world. Those are the ideals of the United Nations: peace, justice, equality, and dignity. In Africa's Sahel region, the Great Green Wall is transforming people's lives by giving them green jobs and bring back biodiversity through restoring 100 million of hectares of degraded land and mitigating the effect of drought. Large-scale restoration initiatives like this can go a long way to make communities more resilient to crisis, bring back biodiversity, reduce the effects of climate change, and provide livelihoods to women and young people. In my first 2 points, I underscored respectively the importance of multilateralism and the need to adopt a new attitude vis-à-vis nature. My third and last point is that we all have a role to play to build back better, stronger, smarter, particularly our youth. As the United Nations Secretary General rightly said, but this cannot be an initiative by old people discussing the younger generations, end of quote. You can all see my gray hair. Initiatives like Green Hope are critical to empowering the youth and amplifying their voice. I feel there is a change in momentum thanks to the participation of our youth who have courageously mobilized communities and citizens alike. Let's follow their lead. As we celebrate our 75th anniversary, I am today more than ever convinced that the United Nations remains the best vehicle we have to make the world a better place. We owe this to our youth and to we, the peoples. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Theo. The pandemic has definitely taken us off track, so we have to ensure multilateralism, a new attitude towards nature, as well as recognize the responsibility and the role we all have to play in rebuilding better, stronger, and smarter. And you are right, the UN is the best vehicle that we have to bring about positive change globally. So thank you once again. Our next panelist is Dr. Chanteleen Carpentier, Chief New York Office of the Secretary General, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Dr. Carpentier, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Kekeshan. It's such a pleasure always to be part of your panel, which are always very well organized. And as USG Tia said, thank you for the youth to give us hope in going forward. And I'm very happy, Kekeshan, that you actually mentioned rebuilding better instead of building back better. UNCTAD does not support building back better. Who would want to go back to an economic and financial model that delivers for the few at the expenses of others and the planet? So what we want is to recover better, which for us means green, resilient, and inclusive economic system and financial system. Not a system that within months collapse because of a bug that we can't even see. So my answer to your question in terms of critical issues would be to reform our trade and investment agreement and treaties that are aligned with the SDGs and offer and support alternative economic model that deliver prosperity for all in harmony with our environment instead of at its expense. And let me explain why. And not that I disagree with my dear friend, Ambassador Espinosa or USG Tia, but I think to achieve the other goals on climate change and the political economy of that, we actually need to change how the money flows and our goods flows. And it needs to be done in respect to the environment and the majority of the people. So over the last 2 decades, the expansion of trade has fueled economic growth, created jobs, increased household income around the world, right? And it's been a key factor behind the rise of the global south, where dozens of developing countries have experienced strong economic growth and positive social change, given the rise to a middle class and the fall of global inequality between countries. And it made it possible for a remarkable achievement, which is, 1 billion people being lifted out of poverty in the space of 2 decades. But of course, we all know this was not
Chanteleen, you got
everyone
cut out.
I'm sorry?
Oh, you're back. You cut off for a second. You're back now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So during the same period as we were opening our economy and opening the free flow of finance, the US and European middle class have been shrinking, workers have been shrinking and their wages have stagnated, while those at the top of the income bracket have captured increased share in wealth and income everywhere. This concomitant trend in reduction in inequality between countries, but increasing inequality within countries, basically is what is flipped the perception that we have of the globalization and trade and investment, right? And yet, and by the general public, and lead to a backlash against globalization, but also of multilateralism, and countries turning towards their inward instead of to outward. While we all know we are not going to solve inequality, climate change, illicit financial flows at the national level. These all require multinational approaches. And so at the same time that these treaties were expanded, we actually moved them beyond pure trade and investment towards IPR, and at the same time, intellectual property right, and at the same time, limiting the ability of government to intervene in their own national markets, to accompany, because we're accompanied by general mantra of less government is better, and leaving place to workers, the displaced workers, by trade and digitalization to fend for themselves, reducing social services and reversing trends in progressive taxation. And on top of it, adding austerity measure every time we have a crisis. We had 3 crises just in the last decade. And each one of them, we try to solve with austerity measure, which just make it worse for youth, women, the most vulnerable in our population, right? And so basically, these are the policies that increase inequality and bring us where we are, not trade and investment or finance agreement on the investment agreement on their own. And this is why we need a reform of the trade and investment system and measure that we have. And UNCTAD has proposed some option in that regard. And given that the WTO is at a standstill anyway, we have the opportunity in a lifetime to actually reform it so it can deliver prosperity for all in respect for our environment. But also this crisis is basically, as the 2 speakers before me mentioned, has showed how interconnected our economy and our life are at a time where we're trying to retract in our own little thing, and how we have the interconnectedness, as Mrs. Espinosa said, of the climate change crisis, the zoonose crisis, the inequality crisis, the refugee crisis, and all of this coming together. And we're not ready. We were taken by completely out of unprepared for this crisis, and we should have been prepared. We knew these things were coming, right? We know climate change is there. We know we need to act, yet we have not done anything. So basically, to respond to your question, so we need to do these things, and especially to adapt, to look at not only the immediate response to the socioeconomic impact of the COVID-19, but also in the context of mid and long-term impact of this crisis, and how we use our stimulus packages is going to determine where we're going to be in the mid and long term. And especially these packages need to go to support jobs, especially in micro, small, medium enterprises, competition, because we're seeing a concentration of market and disappearing of MSMEs, as well as addressing inequality, especially gender inequality, as was mentioned before. And there's still time, Kekeshan, to achieve the global goal, despite all the setback and all the numbers we were thinking would be going up, going down, and those that we thought would go down go up. It's still time. The Club of Rome and the Global Sustainable Development Report has demonstrated that we need and we can have a structural change, transformation that would lead to the achieving the SDG, but we need to transform our economic and financial system. And this is, and we have an opportunity of a lifetime now to do that. So basically, UNCTAD, just to go quickly, has proposed several things, as you know, in terms of developing, we need a global Green New Deal. Why? Because developing countries do not have the capacity that our economies have, like Canada, US, and Japan, to print money and dump. Right now, we are at 13 trillions of dollars that have been basically helicopter drop on our economy. And 2.5% of this is from developing countries. Why? They don't have the fiscal space to do that. For one, they have to, their service to their debt is so high right now because their currency has devaluated. They're paying their debt in US dollars. And on top of it, their debt level has just been skyrocketing, both on the private and the public side. And therefore, they have very little margin left to actually invest in health and in MSMEs and in supporting their economy and the health of their population. So we as an international community we know we're interconnected. We're not going to get out of this unless we all come out together. So we have to help. Our stimulus packages can not only focus in our national economy, and I'm very proud, I'm sure you are too, that Canada is, with Jamaica, is leading this effort on financing for sustainable development in the COVID-19 era and beyond, where we're actually calling for a reallocation of unused special drawing rights at the World Bank. So Canada, for instance, is some of the drawing right we're not using, we've made available for developing countries to use. We've asked for a standstill on debt repayment for those countries so they have some fiscal space to be able to stabilize their economy and protect their population. We've also asked for debt forgiveness in relation to our debt swap, so that countries can actually invest in the SDGs and make up for the drying out of tourism revenues, drying out of remittances revenue, drying out of trade revenue. And now we just have a report today, Kekeshan, that FDI, foreign direct investment, has actually gone down 50% since the beginning of the year. So we actually need all of the population to work together. So we're calling for a global Green New Deal, basically by developed countries to pay these ODA that that they had committed to pay that had not paid. If they could just put a fraction of that, we would have the 500 billion we need right now to help developing countries with the urgent money that is needed. But let me go now to the changing economic model. We know that the economic model that we have right now, it basically is favoring capital over labor, right? So capital return to asset has gone up exponentially, while wages return to labor has basically been stagnating. And so we have to solve this problem. We're not going to have peace. We're not going to have a stable and resilient ecosystem and economic system without that. And so basically, on top of the global Green New Deal, what we're calling for is basically look at alternative economic model already proven, already out there that do work. Circular economy, green economy, blue economy, orange economy. What's the orange economy? It's the creative economy where you, Kakashan, your people of your age, the digital native, have a comparative advantage of using the digital and creative mind to basically find innovative solution, frugal innovation that can actually give access to education, health, and all of these, water and sanitation and electricity, which we're talking about in the SDGs. We also have other models such as the purple economy. What's that? Basically, if we invested, instead of investing in the Green New Deal only in construction and infrastructure, if we invest in the care economy, we actually create more jobs for women, reducing the inequality between women and men, create better fiscal return in the economy, which means you need less austerity. And on top of it, you have a better social protection floor for your population. Social solidarity economy has been proven in France, in Quebec, in Costa Rica, in many other places where it actually by in itself, it's using the community, by the community, for the community, with a fairer redistribution of the income of being created. So we have to actually ensure, and I'm sure young people would be with us on this, in supporting the Secretary General's call to ensure that the G20 recovery package, instead of right now, where twice as much money is being spent on fossil fuel as clean energy in the packages out there, we need to change that right now, because that is not going to bring us in 10 years where we need to be with the SDGs. But if the ratio was flipped, and the majority of that money was going to renewable energy and clean energy, while we just heard from the International Energy Agency that actually solar energy is now the cheapest electricity that we can have, we actually can get there. We have an exit, we have a pathway to get there, but we need to make sure that these $13 trillion do not go in the economy for the few and against the planet, but the economy for all and for the planet. Finally, just quick note on the UN system. As you know, we've been going through a major reform. It's no longer the UN development system, it's the UN development sustainable development system. We have UN country team, which each one of them, I'd like to highlight now as an economist and an outreach data person. And these people together have a duty to actually reach out, something the UN had never done before, to those left behind. Who are the people being left behind by the policies that the government, with our help, are putting forward? So we actually actively go and seek those people and ensure that we address their need. We also, within 2 weeks, Kekeshan, the UN system, 15 of our entities came together to develop a socioeconomic response plan to the COVID-19 with 5 pillars: health, social protection, economic response on job and MSMEs and the informal sector, macroeconomic response, and social cohesion and community resilience. And we've basically now already have 129 plan from that framework that have been down to the national level and being developed in national plan. And it's not perfect. There's weaknesses such as macroeconomic and cross-border gender issue needs to be streamlined in those, but it's moving in the right direction. And I just want to conclude in supporting 145%, as we say in hockey in Canada, Ambassador Espinosa on gender. We need women to be at the forefront and in the decision-making process on artificial intelligence, decision-making, the digital economy, because we're not going to get there otherwise. So we call for a moonshot on investment in women in the fast-growing sectors linked to the digital economy, so we get innovation that are developed by women for women. Thank you so much, Kekeshan.
Thank you so much, Chanteleen. And yes, you're right. We cannot go backwards. We definitely need to reform our trade and investment treaties and how the money flows so that they can align with the SDGs and also address the wealth disparity. And it's very nice to hear that Canada is taking the lead in ensuring that. And while we do not have, we do have time left, it's important that we do not give up as yet to achieve the SDGs, but we do need to transform our economical and financial systems first. And of course, the UN's presence is critical, and they do need to reach out to the farthest first. Thank you once again. And our next panelist is Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, UN Undersecretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs, who will be joining us via video message.
Distinguished fellow speakers, excellent ladies and gentlemen. Throughout its 75th anniversary, the United Nations has faced one of the greatest challenges since its foundation. The impacts of COVID-19 go beyond the health and economic crisis. It has added additional tension to a fraught geopolitical environment and strained our capacities for advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. It has also exposed the fragility of our international institutions and our international security architecture. I will quickly describe just a few of the key disarmament and security issues where actions are needed to ensure the international community builds back strong. First, while COVID-19 has been hugely disruptive and devastating, a nuclear weapon detonation will be significantly more destructive, and no state can respond adequately. It is my hope that this reality compels us to redouble our efforts to eliminate this potentially existential threat once and for all. Second, the pandemic has renewed concerns about biological weapons, particularly their use by non-state actors. With the lessons we learned from the fight against COVID-19, we must seek new forms of international cooperation to increase preparedness and response to any deliberate use of disease as a weapon. Third, the economic shocks created by the pandemic has so far done little to reverse steady increase in military budgets. We must do more to ensure that the effective path to economic recovery comes through reducing the burden of excessive military spending on our societies. Finally, the pandemic-related disruptions also threaten our efforts to keep ahead of the challenges posed by new weapon technologies. Our multilateral institutions have found some ways to move forward efforts on promoting a safe and secure cyberspace, addressing concerns of autonomous weapons, and explore new ideas on preventing conflict or an arms race in outer space. But this work must be accelerated. The problems we are facing as an international community will require a collective response. This means creating more inclusive environments so that no one is left behind, including traditionally disenfranchised groups like women, and by empowering the next generation. If we are going to succeed in getting past this pandemic to a brighter future, we must ensure that all voices are heard. Part of my mission is to promote the equal, full, and effective participation of women in all disarmament processes and decision-making. In my own office, I am working for cultural change and the creation of an enabling working environment which can remove obstacles to women's equal participation. But we must also go beyond participation to address the deeply rooted patriarchal norms that continue to hold back gender equality, especially as the pandemic only further deepened existing inequality. Since the start of the outbreak, domestic violence has intensified. We must not accept this reality. Weapons feed into norms and power relationships and foster such violence. For the 243 million women who are victims of violence from an intimate partner each year, a gun in the home can make the difference between life and death. The design of disarmament and arms control efforts, therefore, need to carefully study and respond to the different experiences of women, men, girls, and boys. My office actively supports the integration of gender perspectives in all programs and through targeted initiatives such as support for gender mainstreaming in small arms control. Our efforts to adopt more inclusive approaches also should not overlook how gender interest with other bases for inequalities such as age, ethnicity, and disabilities. We must also do better to engage youth. Young people have the power to effect change, and their ideas can help strengthen our collective peace and security now and for the future. My office is educating and empowering young people through an outreach initiative, #YouthForDisarmament, where we are making available various resources, including e-newsletters, training programs, and career opportunities. We recently launched a dedicated digital platform at www.youthfordisarmament.org to mark the first anniversary of the General Assembly resolution on youth, disarmament, and non-proliferation. We are also working with our first group of youth champions for disarmament, who will pursue peace and disarmament in their respective communities and countries, and at the global level through their creative means. The pandemic has made clear that in order to create sustainable solutions to the crises we face, we must shift towards a people-centered approach to peace and security. Now is the time to rethink our approaches and reinvigorate multilateralism to rise to the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Nakamitsu. And it's really sad that even the pandemic has not stopped the ever-increasing military budget, and economic recovery is now crucial to guide the resources to where they're the most needed. And we definitely need to shift to a people-centered approach for peace and security. Thank you once again. Our next panelist is Dr. Iyad Abumokli, Director, Faith for Earth, United Nations Environment Program. Dr. Iyad, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kekashan, for the introduction, and thank you for holding such an important webinar at this important juncture of our time. And greetings of peace to my distinguished panelists and all the participants. I believe, in the saying, great minds think alike. And what I have heard from the previous speakers, Ms. Espinosa, Ibrahim, and others, are in general in sync of what I wanted to say. So I will try to skip some of the things because it's obviously clear in the minds of the people who are in the international workspace know exactly what is needed to be done. So let me put it this way, as working on faith and religions and the environment, so I would like to answer those two questions from that perspective with the faith actors and environmental issues in mind. And, Kekashan, I've spoken before in a couple of webinars that you have organized and in many others, why engaging with faith communities is a game changer. But let me simply say, and to put it in perspective, that more than 85% of the global population of humanity associate themselves to a religion, and their behaviors are driven by religious teachings and principles. And whenever a person finds, a problem, they resort to God or whatever they worship. and they go to their houses of worship to seek guidance from God. So religions have very much importance in our daily lives. Let us also reiterate that faith-based organizations and faith-based investment institutions are the fourth largest economic power on earth, and they manage assets of trillions of dollars. So they are powerful players. While I will focus on the faith actors, I'm sure everything else cuts across whatever has been said in other contexts. So first, what do we need? We need strong multilateralism and interfaith collaboration, as mentioned before. So we have seen that nationalism is rising. While it does give a sense of belonging and commitment to national priorities, but nations and faith groups working alone provide temporary and geographically limited solutions, taking into consideration that environmental issues know no borders. So we need a strong, reinvigorated, and inclusive multilateralism to ensure that national efforts are maximized, but also global common goods are dealt with collectively, such as the issue of climate change and the pandemic. The UN Charter, as mentioned by you and by all the other speakers, started by saying we the peoples of the United Nations, and did not say we the governments or we the nations came together. No, it said we the peoples of the United Nations. So the UN was, when it was established in 1945, it was established to deal, as you mentioned, Kekashan, to deal with the impact of world wars. But today, we are also facing a different type of world wars, be it fighting climate change or extinction of species or COVID-19 or poverty or what have you. These are global wars that we are fighting. So over the years, many international agreements, including multilateral environmental agreements mentioned by Ibrahim and others, brought humanity together in addressing many issues, but we have not lived up to our commitments. Multilateralism is the only way to make a meaningful collective effort. And let's look at the Montreal Protocol, for example, for the ozone layer, as a great example of collective global success. Why it did succeed? Because the entire world came together and implemented the agreement. Interfaith groups have been driving some collective actions on many fronts, but better coherence, coordination, and collaboration would not only mobilize billions of people, but will also drive more peace and tolerance to the international community. My second point, leadership at all levels. If we look around and consider success stories of global impact, we will see that there has been a leader behind the vision and the implementation. Whether the leader is a political figure, an individual, an organization, a group of people, or a religious leader, leadership is key to mobilize people to act, or actually not to act. From the perspectives of religion and the environment, we have Pope Francis as an example, who has been key in mobilizing not only Catholics, but the international community with his vision in Laudato Si and his inspiration to action by the organizations that he has adopted or that have adopted his vision. UNEP is also taking the leadership role through its Faith for Earth initiative and is mobilizing the faith communities in sharing knowledge, building capacity, mobilizing local action, facilitating policy dialogue, or bridging the gap between sciences and faith teachings. And having mentioned sciences, my third point is that science is essential to drive our sustainable future. And let me ask a question here. When we feel sick, don't we go to a doctor who is equipped with the scientific knowledge and trust him or her with our lives? Don't we go to a mechanic when our cars break down, to fix our cars, and that is based on science of machines and automobiles, then why, when we face global existential threats such as climate change, we start doubting the science? We need the science that can reinforce the consensus on policymaking options, identify solutions, and guide actions for environmental sustainability. But science not translated into a language that drives action by the ordinary person will not drive movements to act. This is what we are doing at the Faith for Earth initiative, linking scientific evidence to spiritual teachings. And my fourth point, sustainable investment and green economy, as was alluded by my colleagues. We need a new economic paradigm that is inclusive and green, and we need all hands on deck, whether governments, the private sector, financial institutions, or faith-based investment institutions that are, as I mentioned, the fourth largest power on earth. As you all know, there is a church, a mosque, or a temple in every corner of the world. These hundreds of millions of houses of worship can be models of green and sustainable buildings. And faith institutions do invest in or deal with companies that pollute the environment. A global faith and interfaith divestment movement is a key driver to shift towards impact investment that has social, economic, and environmental benefits. We have seen already more than 40 faith organizations have committed to divestment, but this is not enough. This needs to be scaled up and be the norm and not the exception. However, we also need a new system of measuring economic growth. The existing gross domestic product, GDP, has been proven time and again as an inadequate measure and does not account for the cost of environmental degradation and does not include natural resources as part of the economic capital. So we need to create a new measure, which I call the Sustainable Development Domestic Product, as an inclusive measure taking into consideration the socioeconomic and environmental factors. And finally, while indeed technology, innovations, policies, green economy, sustainable financing systems, divestment, and many other measures are very important and should be pursued by all of us, behavioral change is a key in making all this work. Individual and collective actions need to be based on ethical, value-driven, and moral responsibility towards the people and the planet. And in concluding, we must not forget the power of youth. As some of you have put it, you are 50% of the current global population, but you are 100% of the future. And I hope you will join us and be part of the Youth Council we are creating as part of the Faith for Earth Coalition that we are launching during the upcoming United Nations Environment Assembly. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Iyad. Absolutely, engaging faith-based organizations is crucial, especially since more than 80% of the human population identify as religious, so we need strong interfaith collaboration. And the UN, of course, is about we the people, so we need inclusivity of all, and leadership is key for people to act, whether it's a head of state or a religious leader. So thank you once again. And our next panelist is Mr. Jonas Hertel, Chief Office of the Executive Director, United Nations Institute for Training and Research. Jonas, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Kikashan, and thank you to you and the Green Hope Foundation. It's a pleasure to be here. And of course, I have had the privilege now to have listened to all the fellow panelists. So I also wanted to make sure I don't repeat what has been said, because some of the points were mentioned already, and I want to make sure we focus on something that everybody can take some main points away. So I think reflecting on what we've heard, and of course also reflecting on what we can learn from 2020, the time when COVID is really with us, what should the world focus on going forward? And I completely agree with all my fellow panelists. The Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 is, as was said here, the survival toolkit or our common agenda. But I think we could also distill, and that's what I want to just highlight, maybe 5 transformations for our collective future. And I just want to highlight those 5 to make it maybe a little bit easier. And I'm not saying that these are the only ones, but these would be maybe 5 points I would want to highlight. One is quite obviously a transformation of health systems. I mean, if COVID has shown us anything, we need a focus on universal health coverage, which is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, publicly funded, especially for the most vulnerable. Second, we need a transformation of energy systems. We've heard about climate change now. So, I mean, here from our previous speakers, so we need a focus on renewables, on efficiency and access to all modern energy systems for those, I mean, for everyone around the world. Third, we need a transformation of our food systems to tackle starvation, hunger, but of course also in developing countries, obesity and other issues related to the food systems. Fourth, we need a transformation of the finance industry, but I also agree with our fellow panelists. We have this broader issue of the economy, but specifically I think when it comes to the finance industry, especially banks, asset management, investors, to pursue green pathways in their own operations, and this can also then have a huge, effect on the issues we're talking about. Fifth, and that's I want to focus on a little bit more, is a transformation of education systems. If COVID has shown us one other thing, is that from one day to the other, entire school systems were suddenly switched off from face-to-face and had to immediately go to online learning, if that was even a possibility. Because we know that many kids around the world did not have access to the proper IT equipment to actually access this online learning, which was suddenly becoming the norm. But with that, and this is certainly also something that will stay with us, come the question, what are the pedagogical and the methodological approaches that we need when we build this new way of learning online, through social media and so on. So we have, of course, the technology, but we still need to reach many more people. But with that come also the questions of how do we adapt pedagogies and methods of learning. And that's also the second point, or to your second question, I wanted to address it in 2 ways. You asked us what needs to be done, or how do we need to adapt? And I take that as we, from the perspective of the organization I work for, that is one of the learning and training organizations within the United Nations. Our acronym is UNITAR. That's the UN Institute for Training and Research. And then I also want to come briefly to the point of the United Nations itself. So first, from the perspective of UNITAR, again, we are in the learning and capacity building space within the United Nations as one of the main UN learning organizations. We have about 134,000 individuals that underwent in our or participated in our training activities just last year, and much of that comes from, online learning. But COVID and the COVID lockdowns all around the world meant that many of our trainings, which were planned to be undertaken face-to-face, suddenly had to shift to an online learning environment. We were able to actually pull that off for about 70% of our planned activities for this year. And now that we are in a phase where we are looking at the future, we are seeing that this will stay the norm in many of the fields that we do training in. So we are currently exploring new forms of offerings, be it hybrid or only online. And I want to give you a couple of examples. We have a platform that can reach millions of individuals, or 2 platforms actually that we help to support. One is on climate change, and that's the UNCC Learn platform. And we are very proud that we have brought together many of the UN entities, or all the UN entities, which are crucial in that space. And we have translated that into free online learning. And we have just had the 100,000th individual, who is a young girl from Brazil, who took and got a certificate of completion just a couple of weeks ago. So we're very happy to see that an increasing number of individuals from around the world are partaking and upgrading their knowledge on climate change issues. The second platform I wanted to highlight is one on the Sustainable Development Goals overall. That's UN SDG Learn, another platform which UNITAR is hosting, but we are connecting many UN partners and many other partners. And we have seen during the COVID lockdown period that from the beginning, where we had 5,000 inscribed participants, we have now around 50,000 individuals prescribed to that platform. So the challenge remains, I mean, for us, as for many organizations in that online learning space, how do we adapt our methodologies? How do we approach that from a pedagogical perspective so that learning stays and continues to be, fun? If I take as one example, we have all now taken up probably 1 hour and 15 minutes without any interaction directly with our participants. And one way of online learning that I've learned is that every 7 to 8 minutes, you have to interact with your participants. Otherwise, we fear they're just shutting off their screen or going offline. So that's one of the kind of little tricks one has to put into online learning. Last point, from the perspective of the UN, I also very much underline the point that the fellow speakers have made previously on multilateralism and strengthening that. And I want just to add one element here. This what's being talked about as a new form of multilateralism that we need, complemented with multi-stakeholderism. We have heard now that there are many other groups beyond or in addition to governments which need to be added to making solutions really powerful. And we've certainly had a track record now over the last years where this was really visible. Let me just give you a couple of examples. You're all aware of that, but the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, I think would not have been a success hadn't it been for so many partners beyond governments, which were present and of course also online. And another example is a little bit on another level is last year's high-level panel on digital cooperation, where many recommendations for a very new field, internet governance, not new field, but internet governance was raised, of course, also from a number of stakeholders beyond government. I want to end on a very strong call to action, which we've heard also from the other fellow panelists, to all of you who are listening in right now or watching us, to use the Agenda 2030 as a blueprint and find out how you can use this as a guide and in your context. So be it in the university you're studying at, there are a number of initiatives that I'm aware of happening at the university level to adapt curriculum and to organization based on the Sustainable Development Goals. One good network is the SDSN network, which can help you with some guidance on that. But you can also use it in your schools, or of course in your local community, be it in an organization that you work for or are affiliated with, both in the public and the private sector. So a strong call to action, use the Agenda 2030, as we have heard here, as a guiding or as a survival toolkit to help us get out of this current crisis, or the crises that we are currently seeing, because it is a very helpful roadmap that can help us to go forward. With that, I want to end and hand back to you, Kakashi. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonas. And yes, we do need to focus on a transformation of our health systems, energy systems towards renewable energy, food security, finance, industry, and of course, adapting our education system so that we're truly able to have meaningful quality education for all and achieve the SDGs. Thank you once again. Our next panelist is Ms. Maimouna Mohammed Sharif, UN Undersecretary General and Executive Director of UN Habitat, who will be joining us via video message.
Excellency Maria Fernanda Espinosa, Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu, Under-Secretary General and High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, and more importantly, the young people from around the world. I'm honored to send this video message to the UN75 Building on the Legacy webinar. This webinar is being held at a critical time where we are both celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations and doubling our efforts to galvanize support from young people throughout the world to take on the unprecedented challenge we face. Youth leadership is especially important during this time. The COVID-19 pandemic disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, pushing back the decades of advances we have made in creating healthy and prosperous communities. For young people, this has been especially trying time, with the loss of education, job opportunities, and the ability to come together with friends and families. I am here to encourage you and your families to stay safe and healthy. Follow the guidelines laid out by the World Health Organization and ensure that you maintain your distance, wear masks, and wash your hands. It is clear that youth are just as concerned and committed to measures taken to combat the pandemic. I have seen young people helping deliver services to the elderly in slums, taking up extra jobs to keep their families safe, and sacrificing just as much, if not more, to contribute to their communities. Since the start of the pandemic, for example, UN Habitat has partnered with young people to provide an emergency community health response, setting up COVID-19 prevention stations. By the time of the International Youth Day on August 12th, they had washed 2 million pairs of hands, given over 10,000 free masks, and provided critical public health information through innovative ways such as murals. Their work has clearly shown that young people are leaders, and not only of tomorrow, but as well as today. We at the UN and here in UN Habitat are focusing on building back better and greener. We are working with cities and towns to develop policies and legislation to ensure adequate housing for all. Inclusive, affordable, and adequate housing is central to transforming our cities and communities, making them resilient, and to the achievement of SDG 11 and all the urban-related SDGs. It is essential that we do not return to the normal before COVID-19. We need to build back better and greener. In my experience, working with young people, both when I was a mayor in Malaysia and now as the executive director of UN Habitat, I have learned that youth not only are able to act quickly, but you are also able to plan for a better future. I commend you that this meeting is focused on how we can work towards a more sustainable recovery. Currently, over 50% of the world population live in cities, and the now 1.2 billion people, young people, are the largest cohort of youth to have ever existed, and the vast majority of them live in cities and towns. Urban is our future. Urban is your future. Adults, youth, seniors, men and women, the disabled, the LGBTQ community, from all walks of life, must come together to ensure that a new normal is an equitable and fair, where everyone has access to a decent job, good education, medical care, and a healthy urban environment. One small step is to envision a better normal. You can do this through our joint campaign with Foundation Botna, the Future Cities Challenge. Please participate in this campaign and tell us what you think. The better normal is for cities and towns globally where no one and no place is left behind, and everyone has a chance to live a healthy and happy life. Young people, we commit to always support you. Let us work together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maimuna. You highlighted the importance of inclusive, affordable, and adequate housing in transforming our cities, and how we must all come together to create a new normal where everyone has decent jobs, quality education, adequate medical care, and of course, a healthy urban environment. Thank you once again. Our next panelist is Mr. Jan Gustav Stratenais, Senior Advisor of the Stakeholder Forum. Jan Gustav, you have the floor.
Thank you, Kakasan. And I will be apparently the only one using slides. So I will then share my screen, and I hope the technicalities of internet works well. It's always a challenge. And can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, then I will go to slide modus. Okay, am I on? And can you see me? And can you hear me? And can you see the slides?
Yes, to all three.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me, Kekasan. It's always a pleasure, as all my panelists have also said. I've taken the historical approach a bit seriously because I am a historian by training, but also have, of course, a concern and a degree in environment. So summing up what you actually said was what the former executive director of UNDP said: keep what works, elevate what is good, and change what has failed to deliver. I thought that was a very succinct way of putting our challenges today. Then I have another one, and that comes from Timothy Snyder, a Yale historian who has written very eloquently on history and what history can teach us. And he said, history does not repeat, but it does instruct. And with that approach, I'd like to go into some of the issues that I think are important. You asked us to look at the UN and how it has changed the world for the better, and what it is under stress, and how this is going to be in the future. And I thought, well, what are the contributions that the UN have come up with and that needs to be strengthened? Well, there are numbers of them, and these are just a few of them that came to my mind. And I had to, of course, delete a number of them that I wanted to have. Creating the agenda or setting the agenda is extremely important, which the UN has done for 75 years. Setting global standards, often not remembered when we discuss political issues. Helping us understand reality, and I'll come back to that, which I think is hugely important. Expanding and deepening this knowledge, creating and developing concepts, another one which is continually done by the UN. A global secretariat with regional and national support, an essential part of multilateralism, and I'll say something about that. Giving everybody a voice, a possibility to that. And rights-based issues and conventions, and follow up and further develop these issues. And I think that something that is proving the excellence work of the UN is that the UN family has been awarded 11 Nobel Peace Prizes since its inception in 1945. When the world under duress, and we've pointed to that a number of times, they still provide credible reports and assessments. They go where few have gone or will go, addressing emergencies. We know that the emergency issues are around us, but the UN is there, fighting with almost no funds. They fight poverty, they safeguard the multilateral system and its processes, and they bring disagreements into creative and constructive context at the global UN forums. Not always with a solution, but a conversation has been started. And in the future, we all mentioned it, the 2030 agenda, extremely important and something that we can look forward to. And in that context, we need to strengthen the Secretariat, strengthening and understanding the science policy interface, and giving key elements of the UN decision-making and implementing power. So let's see where that goes. I want to address 5 areas: UN and global concepts, the UN Secretariat, a compass in chaos, UN making us understand the world, UN governance, democracy, nation building, and civil society, and the UN all of us in the future. So the concepts first. There is a consistent connection in conceptual development and growing global understanding from We the Peoples, which is the beginning of the Charter, which all have referred to, through the Declaration of Human Rights, the Rio Conventions, the Millennium Declaration, the Report on Larger Freedom, through the many MEAs, to leaving no one behind. If you look at this historically through 75 years, there is a tremendous consistency fighting for the good. The global conceptual development of that values began with the foundation back in 1945, and it continues. And one of the elements of this, which has been referred to a number of times by my colleagues, is trust. Trust expressed through various declarations. We haven't always lived up to it, but just look at the opening we have referred to. We, the peoples, are determined to establish conditions under which justice and respect for obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. It's an amazing statement of trust. And justice is part of that. And look at how justice has been developed over the year. First, it was justice and peace, then justice and rights, then justice and law, and now justice and sustainable development and the environment, and leaving no one behind. And by the way, if you want to pursue this, this is a fantastic book on the issue. And just look at the concept we're dealing with, the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development. It came onto the agenda in 1987, presented through the UN initiatives, Our Common Future. And it was presented by my prime minister at the time, Gro Harlem Brundtland. And it was further developed, whether the world liked it or not, whether the world agreed or not, through 1992 in Agenda 21, 1993 in the Commission on Sustainable Development, through the World Summit for Sustainable Development and the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation in 2002, Conference on Sustainable Development and the Future We Want in Rio 2012, HLPF, the high-level political future mandated to coordinate the 2030 Agenda, and then the 2030 Agenda decided in 2030. A phenomenal development of how to deal with this and how to understand it conceptually. And now, at the top of this diagram, I said, is our mindset fit for purpose? Is our mindset fit for 2030 and beyond? And at the very bottom, I say, institutions reflect our mindsets. And if you look at these 75 years and divide it into roughly 25 years, you can see how the development has gone. First, peace, conflict, Cold War, decolonization, nation building, independence, democracy. Sustainable development and environmental issues at the time was almost at zero, but it was growing. And the universal approach to issues began. UN membership rose from 51 to 127. And then something is really happening. And the 1970s, our paradigmatic change takes place. And I'll come back to the conferences because they allow us to understand what the world is like. We got 1987, our common future, as I said. Aung said in 1992, the Millennium Declaration, and we have the North-South development paradigms that dominate the period from up to 2000. And then it all happens around the SDGs, which I will briefly come back to in a short little while. What about the secretariats? Underfunded, understaffed, and always at the forefront of global criticism. They're global and they're everywhere. And just look at this. The most innovative element of the League of Nations was the secretariat. No one thinks about that. But today it's an essential body of the UN today, and it must be strengthened. Otherwise, we won't be able to do what we want to do. They take notes from meetings, boring, but important. They write up agreements. They follow up decisions. They provide reports. All these are crucial elements to be able to hold governments accountable to what they agreed to at these conferences. And the Secretariat navigates the organization through chaos to order. They provide the essence of continuity. And by the way, they're always criticized because they're too many. Well, 35,000 people work globally. The city of Oslo, my capital, in a small country, has 51,000 people employed at its secretariat, dealing only with Norway. And also, the New York Police Department has 55,000 officers and staff employed, almost twice the staff of the global UN Secretariat. Understanding the world, fascinating, with research reports and science policy interface. And look at this. The 70s were criticized by journalists all over the world because they said global people running around talking to each other and they produce nothing but words. Wrong. 1972, the environment came on the global agenda, established UNEP. We understood the environment as global challenges. 1973, at UNCTAD 3, what my friend Chanteleen Carpentier talked about, the beginning of a just course for trade and development, and they talked about the new economic world order. 1974, the World Population Conference. For the first time in history, we have a global census and understand the demography of the world. The World Food Conference in 1974 follows, and we finally understand the extent of hunger, the problems of hunger, and the agricultural potential. And then finally, 1974, the rest of the world is recognized, and the World Conference on Women in Mexico is finally focusing on gender issues. And the plight and the strength here are illustrated. In 1976, we understand the social implications of living and the poverty of, and the potential of the urban area, which has also been referred to. We finally get the numbers to understand the world. We close some of the most important gaps, huge contributions in the UN conferences. And this goes on. The UN has a track record of producing reliable and credible reports, closing the gap of misunderstanding. Just 3 of them. Last year, 2019, the Global Sustainable Development Report, mapping the challenges for sustainable development. We have the 2030 Agenda document and the biodiversity document, which is referred to. And of course, multilateralism is a must. Everyone has referred to the COVID-19 issue and the necessity for collaborating together. And again, we have research and facts coming from a very neutral and very strong collaboration multilaterally, which is coordinated by WHO. And then what about this one here? The Global Forum for Democracy, Nation Building and Governance. Have we forgotten what happened back in the 1945 to 50s? The Trusteeship Council helped build nations from former colonies. And the UN in this period, up until 1980, allowed poorer nations a global diplomatic system in one room. They didn't have to concentrate on building a very expensive diplomatic system to be recognized. And continues UN through ECOSOC, the Human Rights Council, the UNDP, assist nation states with developing practice, rule of law, working on conventions and governance structure. It goes on. And then of course, it allows civil society a place. The Charter recognizes the NGOs as a legal entity, a first time in legal history, and it becomes a formal actor at the UN. And we know that through the 80s and the 90s, receiving ECOSOC status, especially in Eastern Europe, gave the NGOs a formal position with some protection from suppression. Civil society and non-state actors at the UN allows people and a global platform and a voice to be heard and influence and participate in decision-making. It's never happened in the history of humanity. There were 1,200 voluntary organizations in San Francisco in 1945 when the UN was founded. Today, the more than 4,000 NGOs have consultative status with ECOSOC. And going back to Rio in 2012, more than 30,000 NGOs and NGO people participated there. So this is another success story that must be strengthened. And we know, unfortunately, that the windows of opportunity for civil society is closing. A huge responsibility for UN to go on. And then finally, what about the future? Well, young people and innovative concepts, such as the 2030 Agenda. And it's not just to implement, but it's to understand the complexity. And it's a bigger thing than you want to believe, because how do we get transformative change? Well, just look at it. An integrated approach means integrating 17 SDGs, 169 targets, and 232 indicators, and keep it in your head all the time. You cannot choose 1 or 2 or 3 of the SDGs. You need to keep them in the head all the time. Because as the 2030 Agenda says, they're integrated, interlinked, and indivisible. The social, economic, environmental issues, and they're universal, people-centered, and planet-sensitive. 9 factors to get the transformative sustainable development. When I talk to young people, they say, this is easy to keep in your head. When I talk to decision makers, they say, there are too many. Come on, guys. We're not that old. We can do something together. And finally, one of my favorite quotes, with the intergenerational efforts, we can build a better future. And as Kofi Annan said when he addressed the youth conference in Lisbon in 2000, he said, no one is born a good citizen. No nation is born a democracy. Rather, both are processes that continue to evolve over a lifetime. Young people must be included from birth. A society that cuts off from its youth severs its lifeline. And I think that is the challenge we need to have. Build a better future together. And we can do that. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jan Gustav. You're absolutely right. The UN is crucial, especially during times of crises, as seen historically, and at the present, safeguarding the rights of all and doing so much to close the opportunity gap, achieve intergenerational solidarity, and of course, leave no one behind. Thank you once again. And I would request our panelists to stay on for a few more minutes so that we can take a couple questions from our audience. And I'd like to thank all our panelists for such a wonderful dialogue. We have learned so much from all of you. And I see that we have questions from the audience. So our first question is from Erin Isabel. Erin will be joining us shortly. Hello, Erin, you have the floor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erin from Dubai. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your insights with us. My question is directed at all the panelists. UNEP is one of the UN processes that is headquartered in a developing nation, and the benefits are obvious as it is more connected to the grassroots. So is it possible for the UN offices to have more representation away from New York and Geneva?
Thank you, Erin. Would our panelists like to answer that?
I can if you want, Kekashan. So thank you for the question. I did mention that really quickly, but increasingly we're operating at the UN under the subsidiary principles. So a lot of the work is being done at the regional commissions level, which is in each of the 5 regions of the world. But we also have a country team now in each country. And I was giving the example of the economist that is now in each of our country team, and we have a network of economists. So each of these economists is actually networked together, and then so that's the horizontal network, and then there's a vertical one where we're also connected to the regional the economists at the regional commissions and at the global level, like at UNCTAD or DESA, that we support them. And so this is actually the way that we are decentralizing to the regional and the national level, because the speaker was right. We need to be more increasingly at the level of where the decisions are being made.
Thank you, Chanteleen. Would anyone else like to address that? And if not, then thank you so much, Erin, for that very pertinent question. Our next panelist, our next question is from Narayan Srivastava, who will also be joining us shortly. Hello, Narayan, you have the floor. Narayan,
years ago.
Okay, we just see you now. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I repeat, hello everyone, I'm Narayan from India, and I would like to thank the panelists for the amazing discussion. My question is directed to all the panelists. The United Nations Charter was written 75 years ago. Society has evolved in many aspects from that time. So do you think that there is a need to redefine the United Nations Charter to make it more relevant to the 21st century, specifically to the post-pandemic era?
Thank you, Narayan. Over to our panelists.
Maybe I take a first step at that. I mean, I would also like to hear from the other panelists, of course. It's a good question. I was reminded the executive director of our institute was just asked a similar question, and he actually reflected on that. But let me give you my thought. I think, of course, realistically speaking, there is no way we can currently get the momentum, the political momentum to recreate the charter. But that's a very good question that you're raising, because if we look at 2020 and you would put yourselves, I mean, imagine yourself now putting yourselves into a room together with all the nations and stakeholders, I would underline, and rewrite or write a new charter, what were the topics that would be in there? Environment, I think, would be certainly one big issue. We've all talked about that, and that's not mentioned in the UN Charter. So that's one big topic. I mean, however, and I think that's also important, the underlying values of that are in the UN Charter, I think, hold and can still be applicable for today's, challenges. So while, again, I think, realistically, of course, there is no momentum to rewrite the Charter or to write it again. I mean, I think there would be new topics, of course, challenges that would have to be included. However, we can, I think, use the values and principles that are enshrined in the charter and very kind of, I mean, use it as a very valid document to base our work on. So that would be my feedback to your point, to your question.
Can I have a comment also, Kekashan?
Yes, of course.
It is an interesting question. It has come up, well, as long as I've been working with the UN, and I'm almost as old as the UN, almost, I must emphasize. But I think we could look at the charter as a constitution of a country. You don't go in and change the constitution lightheartedly, but you add to it, you amend it. If you add to the charter all the declarations that have been made, and I think that's relevant because you build what I call the conceptual archives or the conceptual issues of the UN. All through, from the Charter, We the Peoples, through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to its convention, to the covenants, and all the way up through the 2000 Millennium Declaration, ending up with the 2030 Agenda and its preambular text. You see there is consistency on values, but you see also how the text itself is modernized. So don't just look at the charter, because I agree with you, as Jonas said, that it's quite solid in terms of basic values. And then we add to it and upgrade it by adding these other, it's like a law book in a country that grows. If you look at my country's law book in 1814, when we got a constitution, it is very slim. It's like a slim pocketbook. But if you look at it today, you need to put volumes to it to understand it. So rather than going in and open the charter, which I think would be devastating today, look at it and add to it and take all these declarations and look at this at the charter legacy of the UN. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan Gustav. Would any of our other panelists like to answer? And if not, then thank you, Naren, for that very important question. And I shall take our next question from Pragna Vasubal. Pragna is joining us shortly. Pragna, you have the floor. And we can't see you or hear you. Apologies for the tech delay. Yes, we see you now.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. This discussion has been a great learning experience for all of us. I am Pragna from the United Arab Emirates. Is there any other way for young people to be engaged with the United Nations and its processes apart from the major group mechanism? For young people who do not have any connections, just our passion and ground level work, how else can we contribute?
Thank you, Pragna. Over to our panelists.
I can take a shot if you want.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, Chanteleen.
Thank you, Kekashan. So yeah, there are several ways, and the major group is a very good one, but there are other ways. For instance, if you are interested in macroeconomics, investment, finance, debt, and entrepreneurship issues, as well as technology, these are the areas where UNCTAD as is the focal point within the UN system. Our UNCTAD 15 conference is coming up in April in Barbados. And since our last conference, we've created a youth network that actually are self-organized amongst themselves and basically to help us and us help them basically reconceive what a international trade financial system that deliver prosperity for all would look like. And so you are all invited to join us and through that network if you are interested in these issues. And there will be a specific meeting with the delegates, with the youth at UNCTAD 15, where we will be addressing the issues I've been mentioning.
Thank you, Chanteleen. Would any of our other panelists? Yes, Jan Gustav.
Yeah, well, just a quick stab. I think it's a very good question, an important one, because I had the same question a few years ago when I was a bit younger than I am today. And of course, the basic way to get into it would be to join a local NGO, a non-governmental organization, because, you know, whether we like it or not, the UN, as many other multilateral systems, are run on organizational systems. And with an NGO, which is registered in your country, you can easily get accreditation, which means like a pass to any of the UN conferences. So and I think the best entrepreneur in this issue and the best person to answer that question would be yourself, Keiko, because you began as a very young person and you got into it very quickly and you've made a difference. And believe me, there are more possibilities to work with the UN than one thinks about it, at the beginning, because it looks like a huge organization run by diplomats. Well, it isn't. It's run by people. And there you'll find out that once you get through the formal hurdles of getting inside, and you don't have to be part of the major group system, but it is an easy way in. You can also look at all the different parts of the UN, all the thematic parts of the UN, and they have a bit of a different approach system. But as long as you're active and interested, I think that's the first start.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Maria.
Well, I was going to say exactly the same. I think Kekashan is the living experience on how, you know, a young person gets involved with UN work. But, you know, very, very quickly, I think that the UN needs very much to localize its impact and work. And the best way is to engage, you know, in UN activities at the national and local level. The UN is present through its country teams, you know, practically, you know, in every country of the world. There is the UN volunteer service as well. There is, you know, a very robust internship programs of the UN as well. There are UN associations in several countries worldwide. So when, you know, young people used to ask me about how do I get involved, you know, UN doesn't work only in Geneva or Vienna or New York, you know, or Nairobi for that matter. You know, it is, you know, a world network that is present almost in every corner of this planet. And the second issue is, you know, the Secretary General, as you know, has a UN envoy on youth. There is a program of work which is called Youth 2030. There is a whole agenda to include young people in UN decision-making processes. And I think it's also very important that there is political will in the UN leadership. And I'm not only speaking about the Secretariat and UN agencies and programs, I'm speaking the political will of governments to make sure that they include young people in their own national delegations for high-level conferences. The connection with the President of the General Assembly is very important. You know, I made sure myself, usually, you know, young people are called to discuss on the youth agenda, or young people's issues. You know, in every high-level event I had the voice, the presence, the agency of young people, whether, you know, we had a discussion on middle-income countries or climate change, or to prepare for the adoption of the Global Compact on Migration. I mean, you have to have a voice, a seat, and a place in every agenda item of the United Nations. And I would just, you know, back to you, Kekashan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Would any of our other panelists like to address that? And if not, thank you, Pragna, for your question. And we would love to take more questions, but unfortunately, we are way over time. So the questions that we do have, we would be taking them and sending them to the targeted panelists, if that's okay with you. And with that, I would like to request our panelists to give their final concluding remarks in 30 seconds. So we shall start in reverse order. So Jan, Gustav, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Unexpected, but yes, I'm an incurable optimist. And even though we are right now in hardships, there are ways out. And if we give up, there's no way out. And I think that what's been said, multilateralism is a must. We need to have an engaged and a committed process. And I think that young people are hugely important, because you look at issues differently and you look at the issues without having the load of expertise or experience that we have. But I just want to say one thing to the young people. I am pretty old, but I'll be around for another 30 years. So please use me. I can help you, even though you are much younger than I am. Go for it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jonas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much again. I mean, I feel very encouraged after now the time we spent together. So my concluding thought is to everyone, continue to get involved. We just heard about many ways to get directly connected to the UN. I'm teaching a course on the Sustainable Development Goals in one of the Swiss universities, and the students who approach me oftentimes ask me the same question. I also want to play that ball back to you, because the Sustainable Development Goals, which we have talked here, have a very concrete, Sustainable Development Goal number 17 on partnership, where it talks about your actions in the multitude of organizations that you can be part of, be it in the university or in the organizations you will or are already working for. So also see yourselves as change agents in the organizations outside the UN, and use the Sustainable Development Goals as your guiding framework, or as Ambassador Espinosa has said, the survival toolkit. So thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, Jonas. Mr. Iyad, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I believe, look, we have a great charter, the UN Charter, with all its amendments and additions and conventions and so on. We have a great organization. The UN has been effective over the past 75 years, regardless of what some people say. We have an agenda that leads us, which is Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. What we need is just commitment and leadership to go forward. And I believe with your leadership as young people, we can make it. You are the change and you can make it. And I hope that we all can put our hands together and collectively, as we all mentioned, multilateralism, international cooperation, and all together work towards, making this organization even better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chanteleen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Akeshan. So quickly, repeating perhaps a little bit of what people said, we can't solve our illicit financial flow problem, climate change problem, inequality problem, especially related to digitalization at the country level. We have to do it through the multilateral system and all together. Right now, developing countries are at risk of losing decades of progress if we don't all work together and ensure they don't go into a debt insolvency. And we need a new definition, Kukashan, on sustainable financing. What does financing align with the SDG mean? So we need to all agree about that, so that the investment is in line with the SDGs, and this is going to be helping achieve this massive investment that we need in sustainable and nutritious food, renewable energy, and decarbonized economies. So yeah, that's my final word. And thank you for all the youth's energy that you and your colleagues put in.
Thank you so much. And finally, Ms. Maria, you have the floor.
Well, my last word would be to say that we are the UN. We all are the UN, and that we have a responsibility to collectively craft a new culture of multilateralism, where words such as cooperation, concerted action, dialogue, the processing of dissent, it has to be at the center, and we all have a role to play. If we're speaking about building better, if we're speaking about an inclusive, accountable multilateral system, we do have a role to play, and the voice and agency of young people is of critical importance. And I think we have to be very careful about not having, a tokenistic use and participation of young people. They have to be part of the decision-making table. My experience of exercising leadership in an intergenerational platforms has been the most effective way to take informed decisions. And I'm a true believer that that's the way to go ahead. And I think that perhaps what we need to do is to strengthen our narratives of hope, to think about the future, and the future starts today and here. When I hear, young people are the future, you are the future if we believe that the future starts here and now and today. And we have gathered here because we are not indifferent. And I think we do need to fight indifference and commit to building a better world for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And what an amazingly enriching discussion we have witnessed today. Thank you so much to our esteemed speakers for sharing such valuable and unique insights drawn from your deep experiences within the United Nations system. And history bears witness to the fact that whenever humanity has come together, it has been able to overcome the greatest of crises. And your messages today have given all our viewers the pathways that should be adopted and integrated into our policy so that we rebuild better and create a more equitable, sustainable, and resilient world where no one is left behind, and one that truly reflects in reality the spirit of the UN Charter. So please stay safe. The pandemic is not over. Stay connected and take very good care of yourselves and your loved ones. Together, let us truly rebuild better. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kekashan. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.